Hello, welcome to MAAWG's 53rd General Meeting. My name is Amy Cadigan, and I'm MAAWG's Executive Director. MAAWG is a trusted environment. What happens at MAAWG stays at MAAWG. During this session, there is no photography, no video, no audio recording, no video streaming, and no screen capture allowed. MAAWG is dedicated to making our meetings and business open to all members and guests while making it a safe place for all. Reminders for our worldwide friends. We would like to thank our overall meeting sponsor, MailChimp, and our Tuesday sponsor, Validity.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ron Deibert. I'm the director of the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto, where I'm also a professor of political science. And I'm here to talk about the rise of despotism-as-a-service, which is essentially about the Citizen Lab's research into the mercenary commercial spyware marketplace. So I'd like to begin my presentation today with a report that we just published a couple of weeks ago on an investigation that we did where we determined that the phone of a Saudi activist was hacked using commercial spyware manufactured by a company called NSO Group. The spyware is known as Pegasus. This was a very sophisticated hack. It involved what's known as a zero-click exploit. That means that there is no interaction required on the part of the target. They don't need to click on any malicious email or attachment that has malware connected to it. An operator using this type of surveillance technology can simply fire Pegasus at a device and take it over. This also involved a 0-day for all Apple iOS, macOS, and watchOS devices. As soon as we discovered this, we did a responsible disclosure to Apple, worked with their security team. Within 6 days, they issued this emergency security update, which closed the exploit and affected more than 1.6 billion people's security. So for us, this was a very big deal, but it was also one among many episodes involving this type of abuse of commercial spyware that we at the Citizen Lab have been tracking. So today I'm going to talk about who we are at the Citizen Lab, why we do what we do, how we go about doing this type of investigation, and what some of the implications are of the findings, which basically boil down to an extensive abuse problem globally around this marketplace. We are finding that companies like NSO Group are selling their technology to government clients that are routinely abusing it to go after broad sections of civil society. I do believe this is a major crisis, and I'm excited to talk to you all about it here today. So first, let me begin with the Citizen Lab. For those of you who don't know about the Citizen Lab, I'm the founder. I founded it in 2001, and I'm still the current director. We're based at the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. We do research on digital security, or cybersecurity, if you will. That's obviously a very broad topic. We don't cover the entire terrain. Instead, we focus on digital security issues that arise out of human rights concerns. So we're looking at this topic from what we call a human-centric perspective. We assume that those who are interested in cybersecurity in the corporate world, many of your clients, people in this audience, in the government sector, are well taken care of. We're mostly concerned about risks to NGOs, to human rights defenders, to journalists and others who constitute what we broadly refer to as global civil society. The signature of the Citizen Lab is our mixture of methods. So I'm a social scientist by background. My area is international relations, international security, and information technology. However, most of the staff who work at the Citizen Lab come from other disciplines, law, area studies. We especially leverage the methods, skills, and techniques of the technical disciplines, computer science, engineering science. We lean on heavily in the work that we do. So you often hear about interdisciplinary research. in my experience, rarely is it actually practiced. I would say that the Citizen Lab is very much an exception in this regard, and maybe even a model. We take the fact that we're situated at the university and within academia very seriously. We feel that this foundation really strengthens the legitimacy of the research that we do. So we're not an activist group, we're not an advocacy group. We see ourselves as doing very careful, meticulous, data-driven, evidence-based, peer-reviewed research in the public interest around digital security issues. We've been described as a CSI of human rights. That's not a show that I happen to watch, but I understand the reference. If that's helpful to you to understand a bit about our approach, probably makes sense. We cover a lot of different areas of research, tracking internet censorship worldwide, looking at surveillance, looking at some of the risks, the privacy risks around applications and mobile technology. But in my presentation today, I'm going to focus in on our research around targeted digital espionage, and in particular within that umbrella, looking at this mercenary commercial spyware market and some of the harms that we've been documenting and what could be done to mitigate some of these harms that we've identified. So I mentioned this company, NSO Group, which is based in Israel. We first encountered them in 2016 as a part of a research project involving this person, Ahmad Mansour, who's a human rights defender from the United Arab Emirates. In August 2016, he received these two text messages, which purport to show evidence of torture in Emirati prisons, the type of thing that Ahmad might be tempted to click on. Someone was trying to, in fact, trick him into clicking on these links and infecting his device. Instead of doing so, he was a savvy guy at the time, aware of digital threats. He forwarded them to us at the Citizen Lab for analysis. And senior researcher Bill Marzak, who leads our technical investigations at the Citizen Lab, infected his own iPhone in the laboratory setting and acquired a copy of the Pegasus spyware for the first time. And this was where we first encountered this company, NSO Group. Let me say a little bit about NSO Group itself. So this is a mercenary spyware company that's based in Israel. It's made up of veterans of Israel's very sophisticated signals intelligence agency, Unit 8200. When NSO Group speaks to the press, they're pretty consistent in their public messaging. They say, we only sell to the governments, we follow Israeli and local laws, and our spyware is strictly controlled to investigate criminals and terrorists. Well, the first two claims are definitely accurate. The third, however, is much more dubious. In fact, the principal takeaway of my presentation today, and in fact, all of our research at the Citizen Lab over the last decade into this marketplace, is that this type of technology is poorly regulated, highly prone to abuse, because government clients, most of whom are illiberal regimes, authoritarian governments, once they acquire it, they're not just going to go after what any reasonable person would call a criminal or a terrorist. They're going to use it to go after people like Ahmad Mansour, political opposition figures, human rights activists, NGOs, journalists, lawyers, and others. Now, had Ahmad Mansour clicked on those links, his iPhone would have been silently commandeered with Pegasus, allowing the UAE authorities to essentially monitor everything that Ahmad was doing. So this is very powerful technology, as I'm sure everyone is aware. It allows operators to clandestinely intercept any email, any SMS message, even those that are encrypted, intercept phone calls, turn on the audio and video capture mechanisms of a device. So essentially turning a phone into a silent wiretap in any room, and also track the geolocation. That August 2016 discovery that we made also included, in that case, 3 separate Apple 0 days, and we did a responsible disclosure at that time to Apple, and they patched that as well. There's a sad coda to this story. The UAE authorities, I think, got fed up with trying to hack Ahmad's device, and they went out and simply arrested him. They sentenced him to prison for 10 years, where he is, as we speak, for insults to the regime. So again, this illustrates, in the eye of the beholder, of the UAE authorities, what constitutes a criminal or terrorist. Somebody, sadly, like this person, who obviously is not by any reasonable international human rights standard. After that initial discovery of Pegasus in 2016, we reverse engineered the software, started to map out its command and control infrastructure, and start better understanding how Pegasus works and who some of the clients are. We're looking at the domains that are used to trick people that were embedded in some of these text messages that were going out. And we noticed that there was an unusually large amount of activity in the context of Mexico. So beginning in 2017 and through 2018 and even into 2019, we partnered with local Mexican investigators and started discovering a broad swath of victims and targets who had been targeted by Mexican authorities using Pegasus spyware. And the picture here is pretty bleak. So what we found is that contrary to the marketing and to the justifications made by the company in Mexico, what was the government using Pegasus for? Well, to go after journalists, lawyers, public health advocates, research scientists, academics, political opposition figures, of course, investigators into anti-corruption, including, we discovered, international investigators who were brought in to investigate a horrible mass disappearance of 43 students in Mexico. These were diplomats who had diplomatic immunity. All of their phones, we discovered, were targeted with Pegasus during this period. So really a tsunami of reckless abuses in the context of Mexico. Let me just zero in on one illustrative case. This is a Mexican investigative journalist named Javier Hardanes. He was a specialist investigating the drug cartel, very dangerous beat. Unfortunately, he was gunned down in the streets, murdered in Mexico in what was suspected to be a cartel-related hit. The very day after he was murdered, his editor at his newspaper was targeted with Pegasus. And then shortly thereafter, his wife, who you can see a picture of here, after his death, advocating for justice around his case, herself was targeted several times with Pegasus spyware. So again, here you see a very ironic illustration of what I'm talking about. NSO Group has actually advertised the fact that Pegasus was being used in Mexico to investigate the drug cartels. And what we have here is a journalist who was murdered, presumably by the drug cartels, and he was investigating relationships and links between drug cartels and Mexican security agencies, and his community were all targeted with Pegasus infection attempts. Now, as I said, beginning in 2016, right up to the present day, we have been pretty carefully mapping and monitoring NSO Group's infrastructure using a variety of network scanning methods, access to data feeds that are provided by companies to the Citizen Lab to help with our investigations, and also just basic open source intelligence research. This is a stylistic diagram of how Pegasus NSO's infrastructure works. You have the government agency clients and their premises. NSO sets up equipment there, helps provide various types of technical support. And then, of course, on the far end, you have the victim, the hacked iPhone. And in between that is NSO's proxy infrastructure, which is usually hosted on one or another cloud service provider's infrastructure. NSO Group goes to great lengths to say that their operations are obfuscated, very secretive, to protect their government clients. Of course, what we have found is that it is not, that we are able through very careful research methods to map a lot about this infrastructure, including discovering who some of the government clients are and also where some of the hacked devices are checking in from. So to give you an example, in 2018, we published a report called Hide and Seek, and there's a diagram from that report where we showed a global picture of NSO's operations. What you're seeing here are suspected Pegasus infections. These are devices that have been hacked, checking into NSO Group's infrastructure from more than 40 countries worldwide. And as part of this research, we were able to attribute these hacking infections to more than 30 government operators, 30 government clients of NSO's operations. When you zero in on some of those government operators, as we did at this time, you get some pretty interesting snapshots of who certain countries are spying on, or at least which countries they are targeting, individuals living in those countries. And as you can see here, this is a map that we produced of the Saudi client of NSO Group, which we codenamed Kingdom. And what we were most interested in here was that we could see there was a hacked device in Canada that was checking in. This means that the Saudi operator was using Pegasus to infect the device of an individual in Canada. All we could see was that there was a hacked device checking in, but we didn't know who the owner was. So we literally set out to identify who that victim might be. We hypothesized that it would likely be a critic of the Saudi regime, someone who has fled to Canada that Mohammed bin Salman doesn't like. And so we literally went door to door, and lo and behold, we discovered the target. And this is him. His name is Omar Abdul Aziz. Omar, very interesting guy. He fled Saudi Arabia and was granted permanent residency in Canada in 2014. He is very prolific on social media, very popular, a harsh critic of the Saudi regime's human rights record, and basically a satirist of Mohammed bin Salman, somebody that that regime doesn't like. When we met with Omar, we inspected his device, looked through his text message history, and discovered that he had been targeted with a domain that we could attribute to NSO Group's infrastructure, sundaydeals.com. It was a fake DHL shipment notification. Unfortunately, Omar had, just prior to receiving this text message, made a purchase on Amazon, so he was tricked into clicking on this link. What we didn't know at the time was that Omar Abdul Aziz and Jamal Khashoggi, the murdered Washington Post journalist, were very close confidants. In fact, our report outlining our discovery of the hack of Omar Abdul Aziz's device in Canada by Saudi Arabia was published on October 1st, 2018. The very next day, Khashoggi went missing in the Saudi consulate in Turkey, and we all know what happened next. So over many months, Saudi Arabia was intercepting the communications between Omar Abdulaziz and Jamal Khashoggi, and they were discussing in what they thought were private WhatsApp communications, some pretty provocative things. Here's a sample of what they were talking about. These are the type of things that the Saudi regime would describe as being criminal in nature. What they're talking about is the advocacy that they wanted to undertake in order to help promote democracy and human rights in Saudi Arabia. Little did they know that the whole time, Mohammed bin Salman and his security agencies were eavesdropping on those conversations, and we all know how it ended. So this case really illustrates the dramatic, often lethal consequences that can be attributed to this type of mercenary spyware operation when it's in the hands of a government client like Saudi Arabia. Now, up until now, in all of the cases I've been describing, they involve some sort of social engineering, because you need to get a target to click on something, to do something in order to activate the exploit and trigger the hacking of the device. Well, since 2019, we have observed that NSO's Pegasus spyware has evolved to this zero-click form of attack where no interaction is required on the part of the target, and there really is no visible evidence that anything suspicious is going on, which makes it very hard for a victim to defend themselves, but also for investigators to find out what's going on. First time we heard about this was back in May 2019, when some lawyers who were representing victims of NSO Group spyware that had been disclosed as a function of the Citizen Labs research, they reported funny things happening with their WhatsApp, dropped video calls from suspicious numbers and so on. We reached out to WhatsApp security team. They said, aha, this is very bad. Pegasus NSO is exploiting a flaw in our WhatsApp protocol. They quickly patched it. And then Citizen Lab volunteered to investigate who were the victims. So WhatsApp provided to the Citizen Lab the data they had, which really boiled down to about 1,000 phone numbers. That's all we had to go on. We spent about 8 months doing open source intelligence work to both identify who the civil society targets were of this series of attacks, and also notify them. We actually reached out to people and said, hey, here's what happened, here's what you can do to maybe protect yourself. Of course, not all of the targets that we discovered came forward publicly. Objectively rational thing to remain anonymous if you think you're being monitored in this way, but quite a few did. We discovered more than 100 victims in over 24 countries actually around the world. And again here, among those who've come forward publicly that I can speak about, we see the same disturbing picture of abuse, except in this case, it's kind of a global picture. So everything from Catalan opposition figures to opposition figures, lawyers, human rights activists in India, Rwandans who had fled Rwanda, who had close friends murdered by death squads that were sent out by President Paul Kagame, were targeted in this manner. Even Roman Catholic bishops and priests in the African country of Togo were targeted, we discovered. So again, a pretty bleak picture here. And this sort of thing continues. Not that long ago, in December 2020, we published a pretty eye-opening report where we discovered that Pegasus spyware was used to hack 36 personal phones belonging to journalists, producers, anchors, and executives at Al Jazeera. These were all zero-click exploits on iMessage, a pretty massive, extensive campaign of hacking that we attributed with high confidence to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, both critical of Al Jazeera's coverage. I'd just like to point out that NSO Group is not the only company in this space. The mercenary spyware marketplace is large, it's growing, and over the years, we've documented many different companies selling to governments that have terrible human rights track records, including this company, Hacking Team. This report was published in 2014, where we were able to link Hacking Team spyware to 21 suspected government users. And as you can see here, a lot of them are governments that lack public accountability, safeguards over their intelligence agencies, and lots of human rights abuse problems. Here is another company, Finfisher, still active. This was from 2015. Again, another very bleak picture. Here's an interesting case study of yet another company, yet another Israeli company called Cyberbit. In the course of analyzing Cyberbit's infrastructure, we were able to take advantage of an error that the engineers made when they left open a directory that allowed us to see all of the infected devices that were checking in, including a demonstration laptop that they were using as they went around the world pitching their surveillance technology to potential clients. So we could literally follow them around over an 8-month period as they gave these demonstrations to such notable government clients as the Uzbekistan National Security Service, Zambia, Rwanda, Nigeria, the Office of the President of Philippines, obviously not a person who respects human rights, free press, journalists, human rights defenders, and so forth. Here's another example, yet another company called Candiru. This is from a report earlier this year in July. Again, we discovered, based on our investigations, Candiru's spyware infrastructure. We found domains masquerading as advocacy organizations such as Amnesty International, Black Lives Matter movement, as well as journalists and civil society themed entities. Obviously, that suggests that whoever Candiru is selling their technology to is interested in going after these type of targets. Again, these are not criminals or terrorists. These are members of civil society. In that case, we work closely with Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center because this involved the discovery of several 0 days that Candiru was taking advantage of and which Microsoft patched in July 2021. Here's yet another example of a different company. In this case, the company is called Circles, which is a surveillance firm that reportedly exploits weaknesses in the global mobile cellular system, taking advantage of flaws in the SS7 protocol that I'm sure everyone in this audience is aware of, to provide surveillance services to a range of government clients. We determined that some of the government clients of Circles were some pretty bad regimes, including Botswana, Chile, Ecuador, El Salvador, Equatorial Guinea, Guatemala, Honduras, Indonesia, Kenya, Malaysia, Morocco, etc. You know, these are countries that are likely going to abuse this very powerful surveillance service. And I should just underline here, and it's, you know, no secret, I'm sure, to everyone in this audience, but really still poorly understood by the general public and by policymakers, how insecure the global cellular industry is because of vulnerabilities related to the SS7 protocol and other protocols like it, and how easy it is for companies like Circles to get a global title registry and access to the cellular service, identify the locations of phones, intercept text messages and voice calls, and sell that as a product to these nasty regimes that are going to abuse it. In the middle of this summer, many of you probably heard about the Pegasus Project. I just want to say a brief word about it. So as most of you probably know, the Pegasus Project involved a leak of more than 50,000 phone numbers, which was acquired by Amnesty International and this consortium of journalists called Forbidden Stories. I do not know where those numbers came from, but I suspect it was from a whistleblower connected to a Circles-like company. So what we saw in this project were government clients of NSO using these phone numbers to engage in reconnaissance of potential targets before hitting them with Pegasus exploits. The Citizen Lab's role in this project was to do an independent peer review of Amnesty Security Lab's methodology and a selection of forensic devices, both of which we have determined to be very sound. And ever since that time, both Amnesty Security Lab and Citizen Lab have been following up, doing investigations on some of the targets. The main takeaway here is just more of the same problem that I've been describing, only amplified in multiple dimensions. Instead of criminals and terrorists being targeted, we see journalists, human rights defenders, political opposition figures, lawyers, and others, regime critics, who are being targeted by this very powerful spyware. Now, I just want to step back in concluding here to talk about why did this market emerge, and why is it causing such widespread harm, and what could we do about it? So for me, there are multiple roots of this marketplace, but I think the most important moment in time was the Arab Spring, which was in fact 10 years ago. The Arab Spring, we all witnessed where it seemed that digital technologies were empowering this new type of street protest movement, which led to the toppling of dictators and autocrats that had been around for decades. It was jaw-dropping. And at the time, everyone attributed this movement's power to digital technologies, to social media. What they didn't fully grasp at the time was how invasive by design, insecure, poorly regulated, and prone to abuse the social media ecosystem truly is. Now, for all of us watching, the lesson we took was, well, this is great. This is a demonstration of digital technologies and how it enables social movements. But for dictators around the world, they looked at this and they said, how do we prevent something like that from happening here? I don't want this to happen in my own backyard. And what they did is they went out to the marketplace and found a number of companies that started to sprout up, offering them surveillance services, offering them the ability to get inside devices of opposition figures and effectively neutralize them. And they were selling their technologies at trade shows like ISS World and others. And there are now, there is now really a panoply of these type of companies that are out there selling this type of service to government clients that have a huge appetite for it because they want to be able to maneuver through cyberspace. The problem, of course, is around what constitutes a criminal or who is a terrorist. So, most reasonable people, I think, have a pretty good idea of what that looks like in the context of a liberal democracy. The problem is the world is sliding into authoritarianism. Most of the world's governments are corrupt, lack proper accountability over their security services, are run by authoritarians. And in their eyes, what constitutes a criminal or a terrorist is anyone who is in opposition to usually their corrupt, despotic aims. And so that's where we're really seeing the problem around this marketplace. There is no broad global regulation around how these technologies are being used. Governments that maybe have to provide export licenses to the companies are not being rigorous and preventing or mitigating sales to government clients that are going to abuse them. And so this is kind of like a big hurricane here that we're seeing globally, and we're really at the front edge of it, frankly. This is why I think this is the most important crisis of global civil society and democracy in the world right now. Magnifying this problem is a structural imbalance between the targets. So it is true that this type of technology and others like it, hack for hire operations and so forth, are targeting industry and government. But the difference here is that regardless of how insecure their networks may be, at least stakeholders in industry, in government, usually have significant resources, and they can go out and contract with threat intelligence companies and others to help mitigate the risks, defend themselves appropriately, and take action against whoever is targeting them. When it comes to civil society, that's not the case. Generally speaking, civil society lacks capacity. If you look at a typical NGO in the developing world, not only are they not able to contract with like Mandiant or FireEye or something like that, typically they have one person or a handful of people who are responsible not only for network security, but also plugging in everyone's laptop and setting up the projector for presentations and making sure the printer is working. And yet, all of those sectors are targeted by the same threat actors using this increasingly sophisticated commercial spyware. So we've got a real problem here, a market failure for civil society. And this is in the context of a geopolitical environment where we're seeing shrinking spaces around global civil society, as authoritarianism is on the rise, as offensive doctrines in cyber attacks are normalizing, And as you have this unaccountable marketplace for private intelligence, surveillance services, hackers for hire proliferating, this is a pretty bleak picture. And I will also say that it completely inverts the picture that most people had in their minds 20 years ago when they started to think about how information and communication technologies would enable the flourishing of global civil society. We're really seeing that picture being turned on its head. So finally, what do we do about this? Well, this is a complicated problem, and there is no single technological solution or even a single approach that's going to solve this problem. I'd like to go through a couple of options that are on the table right now and point to some areas where I think some progress could be made. So first of all, some of my colleagues in the community, in the human rights space, including former UN Special Rapporteur David Kay, have called for a moratorium on the sale, transfer, and use of these type of surveillance tools that are causing such widespread harm. While I understand the motivation behind making such a call, which helps underline the dramatic nature of the harms that are associated with the mercenary spyware marketplace, I think ultimately this is pretty unrealistic. And the reason is just about every government has a stake in this industry continuing. And it's unlikely that the Saudi Arabias, the Chinas, the Nigerias of the world are going to abide by such a call. What do we do instead? Well, there are things that could be done at a lower level with some what I would call low-hanging fruit. So first of all, liberal democratic governments could get together and set a standard, at least when it comes to their own jurisdictions and to the vendors that they contract with. Things like tightening up licensing requirements and export controls, creating laws that would enable victims and targets to sue the companies and sue the foreign governments that are responsible for this type of targeted espionage, make it illegal, in other words, in jurisdictions like the United States, Canada, UK, Germany, and elsewhere. That wouldn't solve the problem, but it would help, as I say, at least tackle some low-hanging fruit. We've seen some progress in Europe along these lines, new export controls, police cracking down on some of the companies, but it's a mixed picture because recently there were revelations that the German police secretly bought Pegasus spyware, and there are other European clients of Pegasus spyware. And of course, they're contracting with companies other than NSO Group as well. So it's a very complicated picture. It won't be easy to convince all of the stakeholders, even within liberal democratic countries, to do something about this. Another short-term measure is litigation. So WhatsApp, after the May 2019 zero-click exploit discovery, actually sued NSO Group in US courts, and that litigation is continuing. And there are a variety of other lawsuits like that are ongoing. And there is currently, reportedly, an FBI DOJ investigation into NSO spyware. If these types of law enforcement investigations and litigation actually proceed successfully, they could bring significant financial penalties to companies like NSO Group, which might introduce more due diligence on the part of their ownership groups. These are very valuable companies, to be more risk averse, to not be so frivolous about to whom they sell their powerful surveillance technology. Meanwhile, this is basically a stylized diagram of how we're going along ourselves and what we think could be done in the absence of any government regulation. So obviously the type of research that we do and which journalists do, evidence-based research, is essential to raising awareness about the problem. We're working on trying to build up in-house technical capacity for civil society globally by advocating on their behalf with foundations that support their work. That's a heavy lift, and a long-term challenge, but it's working. We're also working with advocacy groups who are providing legal support, sometimes pro bono, to affected organizations, which can help. But lastly, and really this remark is intended for this audience, we at the Citizen Lab and other groups really benefit from collaborations with industry. We are not a company ourselves. We don't take contracts. We have to remain at arm's length from the private sector because often private companies are the focus of our research. But we do collaborate with threat intelligence companies and security teams, many of whom don't see civil society as a lucrative client base. That's understandable. But they do see a lot of the harms that we also see, and there are ways in which partners from industry can assist in the type of work that we do. So that's it for me with my presentation. I look forward now to receiving any questions or comments you may have. Thank you very much.